She wasn't supposed to fall asleep at the sound that made a room full of aliens go silent. The lights in the training hall dimmed, and 40 cadets sat in careful rows, back straight, eyes fixed on a massive screen at the front of the room. Instructor Varkosh stood beside it, arms folded behind him, the way he always stood when he wanted to be taken seriously. He was proud of this lesson. He had built it himself, over 3 cycles of teaching, refining it until it landed exactly the way he wanted. Today was the day he introduced his students to the concept of true fear, real fear, the kind that separated soldiers who survived from soldiers who didn't. Before you graduate this academy, he said, his voice carrying easy across the room, you must understand danger, not the danger of weapons, not the danger of ships, the danger of instinct, the kind of fear that lives in your body before your mind even understands why. He tapped the control panel, and the first sound played. A low, rolling growl filled the room, deep enough that a few cadets felt it in their chest before they consciously heard it. Several flinched. One young cadet, near the back, gripped the edge of his desk. That, Varkosh said, satisfied, is a vocal signature of a pack hunter from the outer colonies. Extinct now, thankfully. But listen to how your bodies respond. That is fear doing its job. He let the silence stretch before playing the next one. And the next, each recording rougher than the last. Each one designed to climb the ladder of terror a little higher. Screeches that sounded like tearing metal. A rumbling snarl that seemed to come from something far too large to imagine. With every new sound, the room grew tighter, the air heavier, cadets shifting in their seats, unwilling to look away from the speakers, even though every instinct told them to. Near the middle of the room, one student sat differently than the rest. She wasn't gripping her desk. She wasn't holding her breath. She was leaning back slightly, arms loosely crossed, watching the screen the way someone watches the weather report for a storm that isn't coming their way. Her name was Mia Chen, and she was, as far as anyone in the academy could tell, unremarkable. Average scores, average marks in combat simulations. The kind of student instructors forgot the names of by the end of the term. She had said maybe 11 words out loud since the semester began. Varkosh reached the final recording. He had saved it for last on purpose. This, he said, lowering his voice for effect, is classified as one of the most dangerous predator signatures ever recorded in known space. A creature capable of ending a fully grown soldier in seconds. I want you to listen carefully, and I want you to remember exactly how your body feels right now. He pressed play. A deep, guttural growl rolled out of the speakers, low and warning, followed by a sharp, hissing snarl that seemed to promise violence with no hesitation at all. The room went rigid. A cadet in the front row actually gasped. Another pressed both hands flat against the desk like he needed something solid to hold on to. Even Varkosh, who had heard the recording dozens of times while preparing the lesson, felt his shoulders tense. Then, from the middle of the room, Mia Chen laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't mocking. It was a kind of soft, surprised laugh someone makes when they see something familiar in an unexpected place. Every head turned toward her. Varkosh stopped the recording mid-growl, the sudden silence somehow louder than the sound had been. Is something amusing, cadet? Mia straightened slightly, aware now that the entire room was staring at her, but she didn't look nervous. She looked almost apologetic, like she hadn't meant to interrupt. Sorry, she said. It's just that's a house cat. The words landed in the silence and simply sat there. A few cadets blinked, unsure they had heard correctly. Somewhere near the back, someone repeated it under their breath, like saying it again might make it make sense. Varkosh's expression didn't change right away. He was used to students misunderstanding things. He was used to nervous jokes meant to release tension in a tense room. But something about the way she'd said it, plainly, without hesitation, like she was correcting a mislabeled chart, told him this wasn't a joke. Explain, he said. Mia glanced around at the other cadets, all of them still frozen mid-flinch from a sound she apparently found unremarkable. She hesitated for just a moment. The way someone does when they realize the thing they're about to say is going to change how people look at them. It's a small animal, she said. For legs, saw fur about this big. She held her hands roughly a foot apart. Millions of humans keep them in their houses. Mine slept on my bed every night growing up. The silence that followed wasn't confused anymore. It was something closer to disbelief. Varkash stared at her for a long moment, his carefully built lesson suddenly feeling much smaller than it had a few minutes ago. "You are telling me," he said slowly, "that this is a domestic companion animal." "Yes, sir. One that lives inside human homes. Willingly." "Yes, sir. Most of them are pretty affectionate, actually." A nervous laugh broke out somewhere in the back row, quickly silenced by a glare from Varkash. But the question had already taken root in the room, spreading from cadet to cadet like a current none of them could stop. If that sound came from something humans invited into their beds, what else had they built into their daily lives without a second thought? Varkash turned back to the console, his fingers hovering over controls, his earlier confidence replaced by something closer to curiosity, and, though he wouldn't have admitted it yet, a flicker of unease. "We are not finished," he said. "Not even close." Varkash didn't sit down. He stood there for a moment, one hand still resting near the console, studying Mia the way a man studies a puzzle he suspects is missing a piece he hasn't found yet. "If that was truly a domestic animal," he said, "then perhaps our records are incomplete. Let us test that theory." He pulled up a new file, one he hadn't planned on using today. It was labeled in the Academy's threat catalog as a mid-tier predator signature, gathered from an early scouting probe decades ago. He hadn't intended to play it in a first lesson setting. It felt suddenly necessary. The recording began with a low, huffing snort, followed by a series of sharp barks that rose and fell in an aggressive rhythm. A few cadets tensed again, though not as violently as before. They were watching Mia now more than the speakers. She tilted her head, listening, and a small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "That's a dog," she said. "German Shepherd. Probably, maybe a Malinois. People train those to help police officers. Some of them work with soldiers, too." Varkash's jaw tightened. "Trained. As weapons." "Not really weapons," Mia said, choosing her words carefully. "More like partners. They protect people. Find things. Some of them are just pets that bark at the mailman." A cadet near the front, a lanky boy named Threll with pale blue markings along his jaw, raised a hand without waiting to be called on. "What is a mailman?" "Not important right now," Mia said, and a ripple of quiet laughter moved through the room, softer this time, less nervous. Varkash didn't laugh. He moved to the next file, then the next, each one pulled from progressively older, more obscure records. A rasping hiss that Mia identified as a large snake kept by a neighbor down the street. A series of sharp clicks and whistles that she said belonged to something in the ocean, though she admitted she wasn't entirely sure which one, since humans apparently had a great many dangerous things living in their oceans. A rumbling call that made two cadets actually cover their ears, which Mia calmly explained belonged to an animal her uncle used to keep on a farm, mostly for milk. Each answer chipped away at something in the room. Not fear exactly. Something structural. Something built into how these students have been taught to understand the galaxy. Varkash scrolled further back in the archive, further than he usually let students see. The file he found next carried a warning tag he rarely used, something reserved for entries the Academy considered historically significant. It was labeled only by a designation number, gathered from Earth's earliest recorded scans, back when the planet had first been cataloged as a low-priority world. This, he said, was flagged as an extinction tier threat, one of the most dangerous acoustic profiles ever logged from that planet. He played it. The sound that came through the speakers was different from the others. Lower, older, somehow, though Varkash couldn't have explained what that meant about a sound wave. It carried a rasping, resonant quality that seemed to vibrate to the floor itself, followed by a series of deep, chest-rattling exhales. This time, even Mia went still, not frightened, focused. The room noticed a shift immediately. Cadets who begun to relax sat up straighter, sensing that whatever was about to happen, it was different from the pattern they'd settled into. "That one," Mia said slowly, "I don't actually recognize." Varkash felt something in his chest loosen, just slightly. "Finally. Then perhaps," he said, "we have found the edge of your confidence." Mia shook her head, still listening as the recording looped back to the beginning. "No, I mean, I don't recognize a specific animal, but I recognize a pattern. She paused, choosing her next words with more care than she'd used all lesson. That's not a house pet. That's something wild. Something old. The room seemed to hold its breath along with her. There are animals on Earth, she continued, that people don't keep, don't tame. Big ones. Old ones. The kind of animals that used to be at the top of everything before we built cities, and fences and glass windows to keep them out. We don't play their sounds in classrooms for fun. We build entire warning systems around some of them. Varkash studied her carefully. And yet you are not afraid. I didn't say I wasn't afraid, Mia said. I said I recognize a pattern. Those aren't the same thing. It was the first crack in her composure since the lesson began, small but visible, and Varkash caught it. Explain the difference, he said, quieter now, the performance draining out his voice, replaced by something closer to genuine curiosity. Mia hesitated. For the first time, the eyes of the entire room fell heavier on her than they had all lesson, and she seemed to feel it too, the weight of 40 classmates waiting for an answer she hadn't planned on giving. Because being afraid of something, she said finally, and knowing how to survive it aren't opposites. Where I'm from, you learn both at the same time. Or you don't get the chance to learn anything at all. The words landed differently than her earlier ones. There was no laughter this time, no ripple of nervous amusement working through the rows of desks. Just a stillness, the kind that comes when a room stops watching a demonstration and starts listening to a person. Varkash let the silence sit longer than he needed to. Then he switched off the display, the low growl fading mid-breath into nothing, and looked at Mia the way he might look at a file he suddenly needed to reread from the beginning. After this session, he said, you will stay behind. I have questions that do not belong in front of the class. Threll leaned toward the cadet beside him and whispered something that carried just far enough for half the room to hear. I think we just found out humans aren't the boring ones. The rest of the class filed out once the session ended, their voices lower than usual, the kind of quiet that comes after people have been handed something they don't quite know what to do with yet. Threll lingered near the door for a moment, glancing back at Mia, then thought better of whatever he'd been about to say and left with the others. Varkash waited until the room had emptied before he spoke again. He didn't sit down across from her the way instructors usually did during private conversations. He remained standing near the console, arms crossed now instead of folded behind his back, a posture Mia hadn't seen him use before. I have read your world's file, he said, before this lesson. I read it twice, in fact, because the first read left me with more questions than the report answered. Your planet has one of the shortest threat assessments in our archive. Low technological aggression, minimal expansion history at time of contact, and a strange, recurring note I did not understand until today. He tapped the console, and a short line of text appeared on the screen behind him. Subject display unusually low fear response to native apex predators. Cause unknown. Recommend further study. That note is over 60 years old, Varkash said. Written by a surveyor who never returned to finish the study. I assumed it was an error. Faulty equipment, perhaps, or a small, unrepresentative sample. It wasn't an error, Mia said. So I am beginning to understand. He studied her for a moment. Tell me why. Mia was quiet for a while. Not the hesitant quiet of someone hiding something, but the kind that comes when a person is deciding how much of themselves to hand over to a question. When I was 9, she said finally, my family lived at the edge of a forest. Not a big property, just a house, a fence that didn't really keep anything out, and about 2 acres of trees behind it. My dad used to say the fence was more of a suggestion than a barrier. She paused, and Varkash, for once, didn't push her to continue. He simply waited. There was a storm one night, a bad one. Power went out, trees came down, and somewhere in all that noise, our dog got spooked and got out through a gap in the fence. My mom went looking for her with a flashlight, and I followed because I was 9, and I didn't understand why that was a bad idea. And the animal you didn't recognize, Varkash said quietly, the one from the older recording. Mia nodded. We found the dog first. She was fine, just scared, hiding under a fallen branch. But there was something else out there that night, too. Something big. I never saw it clearly, just the shape of it moving between the trees, low to the ground. Watching us the way you watch something you're deciding whether or not to bother with. What did you do? My mom picked me up, Mia said. And she didn't run. That's the part one remember most. She didn't run, because she knew running was the wrong thing to do. She just backed us away slowly, talking low and calm the whole time, like she was having a conversation with it instead of fleeing from it. It watched us go. Then it was gone. Varkash's arms had uncrossed at some point during the story, though he didn't seem to notice. You were afraid, he said. Terrified, Mia said. My hands were shaking so hard I couldn't hold the flashlight steady. But my mom wasn't panicking, so I didn't either. Not completely. She taught me something that night without ever really explaining it. Being scared doesn't mean you lose control of yourself. It just means you're paying attention. The room was silent, except for the faint hum of the console behind Varkash. That sound today, Mia continued, the one I said I didn't recognize. I think it might have been something close to what we heard that night, or something like it. I can't be sure. We never found out exactly what it was. My dad looked into it for weeks afterward and never got a clear answer, just tracks and a few blurry pictures from a camera he'd set up in the yard. And this did not make your family leave, Varkash said. It wasn't quite a question. No, Mia said, and there was the faintest trace of a smile now, tired but genuine. It made my dad buy a better camera. Varkash let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh, but was close enough to one that Mia noticed. I do not understand your species, he admitted. I have taught this lesson for 3 cycles. I have shown recordings that make grown cadets freeze in their seats. And you are telling me that a 9-year-old child, faced with something unknown in the dark, was calmed simply because her mother chose not to run. It's not about not being scared, Mia said again, more firmly this time, like she needed to understand this part specifically. It's about what you do with the fear once it's there. My mom was scared. I know she was. But she didn't let it decide what happened next. That's the whole thing. That's the entire difference between us, and what your report couldn't explain. Varkash was quiet for a long moment, turning something over in his mind that Mia couldn't quite read from his expression. There is a training exercise, he said finally, conducted at the end of this term. A controlled environment, a contained subject, meant to test a cadet's composure under genuine threat rather than a recording. I had not planned to move it earlier in the term. Something in the way he said it made Mia go still. But given what has happened today, he continued, I believe I need to see this for myself. Not a sound, not a story. I need to see whether what your mother taught you in a forest can hold up against something real. Mia felt a small, cold weight settle in her stomach, the kind that comes when a conversation shifts from comfortable to serious without warning. Sir, she said carefully, with respect, that sounds like a bad idea. Perhaps, Varkash said, but I did not build my career on comfortable ideas. Cadet, I built it on understanding fear. And for the first time in a very long while, I find myself uncertain whether I understand it all. He turned back to the console, already pulling up a new file, this one marked with containment protocol Mia didn't recognize. Report to the training wing tomorrow morning, he said. 0700. Do not be late. The training wing was colder than the rest of the academy and quieter, the kind of quiet that came from thick reinforced walls rather than empty hallways. Mia arrived at 0650, 10 minutes early, because showing up late to whatever this was felt like a very bad way to start the day. She wasn't the only one there. Threll was leaning against the wall near the entrance, arms crossed, trying and failing to look like he hadn't been waiting for her. 2 other cadets stood near him, a quiet girl named Asa who rarely spoke in class, and a broad-shouldered cadet named Draith who had spent most of yesterday's lesson looking like he wanted to disappear into his seat. You heard, huh? Mia said. Everyone heard, Threll said. Varkash doesn't exactly whisper when he's excited about something. He's not excited, Mia said. He's testing a theory. There's a difference. Is there? Asa asked quietly. It was the first thing Mia had heard her say all term. Before Mia could answer, the doors at the end of the corridor opened, and Varkash stepped through, dressed in a heavier uniform than his usual teaching attire, the kind meant for controlled environments rather than classrooms. He looked at the small gathering of cadets with mild surprise, though not displeasure. "I did not request an audience," he said. "We're not an audience," Threll said. "We're moral support." Varkash studied them for a moment, then gestured for all of them to follow. "Then you may observe from the containment gallery. Cadet Chen will be the only one inside the primary chamber." The word inside landed heavier than Mia expected. They walked through a series of reinforced corridors until they reached a wide observation deck overlooking a large enclosed chamber below, its walls lined with thick transparent paneling. On the far side of the chamber, a heavy containment door sat sealed shut, a status light glowing steady green above it. "The subject," Varkash explained, standing at a control console near the railing, "was acquired from a border world during a routine survey 3 years ago. It has been kept in a stable, monitored environment since. It is not aggressive without provocation. It is, however, powerful enough that improvisation would be unwise." "How powerful?" Drath asked, voice tight. "Powerful enough that I would not stand in that chamber myself without extensive preparation," Varkash said simply. Mia felt her stomach tighten, but she kept her expression steady, the way her mother had taught her without ever using those exact words. "Being scared doesn't mean you lose control of yourself." "What exactly do you want me to do?" she asked. "Enter the chamber," Varkash said. "Remain calm, observe the subject's behavior, and respond according to whatever instincts your species apparently developed for this exact situation. I will monitor from here. At the first sign of genuine danger, containment protocols will activate and remove you from the chamber immediately. And if the protocols are slow," Threll muttered, just quiet enough that Varkash either didn't hear or chose to ignore it. Mia looked down at the sealed door, then back at Varkash. "Why does this matter so much to you? It's one exercise, one data point." Varkash was quiet for a moment, his hands resting on the edge of the console. "Because if what you told me yesterday is true," he said, "then everything I have taught cadets about fear for 3 cycles is built on an incomplete understanding. And if I am going to change that, I need to see it proven, not told to me. Proven." Mia understood that more than she wanted to admit. She'd grown up around adults who needed to see things for themselves before they believed them, her own father included, with his cameras and his weeks of searching for tracks in the mud. "Okay," she said, "let's prove it then." She made her way down to the chamber entrance, where a technician handed her a small communication device to clip onto her collar, along with a brief, nervous explanation of the emergency signal she could trigger if needed. Mia barely heard half of it. Her focus had already narrowed, the way it used to when she was younger, and her father would take her on quiet walks through the trees behind their house, teaching her to read the world through sound and stillness instead of noise and motion. The containment door hissed as it unlocked. Mia stepped through into the chamber, and the door sealed shut behind her with a heavy, final sound. The space inside was larger than it looked from the observation deck, dimly lit, with uneven flooring designed to mimic natural terrain. Rocks, shallow ridges, a few clusters of sturdy, artificial vegetation. It took her a moment to spot the creature, tucked into a shadowed alcove along the far wall, low and still, watching her the way a predator watches something it hasn't decided is worth the effort yet. It was larger than she expected. Sleek, dark-scaled, low to the ground, with a build that reminded her uncomfortably of the shape she'd glimpsed in the trees all those years ago. Not the same animal, but close enough in posture and stillness that her pulse spiked before she could stop it. "That's fine," she told herself. "Let it spike. Just don't let it decide what happens next." She slowed her breathing, the way her mother had, and lowered herself carefully, not into a crouch that could look like preparation for an attack, but into something smaller, less threatening, the kind of posture that told a wary animal she wasn't a danger worth confronting. Above her, through the reinforced viewing panel, she could just make out the shapes of Varkash and the others watching, still and silent. The creature shifted, muscles coiling slightly beneath dark scales, and let out a low, rolling sound from deep in its chest, one that vibrated faintly through the floor beneath Mia's feet. On the observation deck, a soft chime sounded from the console, and a status readout flickered from steady green to a cautious amber. Varkash's eyes narrowed as he leaned toward the display, watching the numbers shift. That, he murmured, mostly to himself, was not part of the baseline behavior profile. The amber light on the console pulsed steadily now, and Varkosh's hand hovered near the emergency override, not pressing it, but ready. Down in the chamber, Mia held her position lowered, still, her breathing slow, and even despite the tightness building in her chest. The creature hadn't moved from its alcove, but its stance had changed. Weight shifted forward onto its front legs, head lowered slightly, the posture of something deciding whether the space between them was worth closing. She'd seen something like this before, not in A Memory of the Forest, but in videos her father used to show her on quiet evenings, old documentary footage of wolves and big cats, their bodies telling stories long before their movements caught up. Lowered head, forward weight. That wasn't curiosity. That was calculation. Don't run. Don't make yourself small in a way that looks like retreat. Don't make yourself big in a way that looks like a challenge. Mia shifted her weight back slightly, not away, just settling, and let out a slow breath through her nose, deliberately audible in the quiet chamber. It was a small thing, almost nothing, but her father had done it too, that night in the trees, a low, steady exhale that wasn't a threat and wasn't fear, just presence. The creature's head tilted, ears, or whatever passed them beneath the ridged scales, angling toward her, on the observation deck. Threll's knuckles had gone pale against the railing. Is it working? I do not know, Varkosh admitted, eyes fixed on the readouts. The behavioral algorithms were not built to interpret this response pattern. Below, the creature took one step forward. Mia's heart slammed against her ribs, and every instinct she owned screamed at her to move, to retreat, to do something other than stand still while a powerful, unfamiliar animal closed a distance between them. She didn't listen to that instinct. She listened to the other one, quieter, harder to hear, the one her mother had spent years teaching her to trust instead. She didn't step back. She turned her body slightly to the side instead, no longer facing the creature directly, shoulders angled, eyes not locked onto its own but resting somewhere near its front legs. Direct eye contact was a challenge in most predator behavior she'd ever studied, human or otherwise. Looking away entirely was surrender. There was a careful middle distance, and she reached for it now, hoping the same instincts that worked in a forest half a galaxy away meant anything here. The creature stopped. It huffed out a breath, low and rough, and some of the tension eased from its shoulders. Not all of it, but some. The amber reading is stabilizing. A technician's voice reported over the comm system, tight with surprise. Varkosh didn't respond right away. He was watching Mia with an intensity that had nothing to do with data readouts anymore. For a long moment, nothing happened. The creature watched her. Mia stayed where she was, angled, calm, patient in a way that felt like it was costing her everything she had. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a clock was running, counting seconds that felt like hours. Then the door alarm blared. Not the containment door Mia had entered through. A secondary access panel near the far wall. One Mia hadn't even noticed. Flash red as its lock mechanism failed. Grinding open a few inches before jamming halfway. A maintenance technician's panicked voice crackled over the comm system from somewhere deep in the facility. Structural fault in the secondary access corridor. I need that chamber cleared, now. The creature's head snapped toward the new sound, ears flattening. The careful stillness Mia had spent the last several minutes building shattering in an instant. It let out a sharp, warning snarl, and this time it didn't stay in its alcove. It moved, not toward Mia, toward the jammed door, toward the grinding, unfamiliar noise that its instincts read as something worse than the strange, calm presence had been studying for the last few minutes. It was fear now, not curiosity, and fear made animals unpredictable. Mia, get to the primary door now. Varkosh's voice cut through the chamber speaker system, sharp and urgent, all pretense of careful observation gone. Mia's body wanted to run. Every part of her screamed to bolt for the exit, while the creature's attention was elsewhere. But her eyes had already caught something the observation deck couldn't see from their angle. A second technician, younger, clearly new, frozen against the wall near the jammed door, directly in the creature's path, too terrified to move. There's someone by the secondary door. Mia called up, already moving, not toward her own exit. but sideways, cutting an angle between the creature and the panicked technician. Mia, that is not the plan. There isn't time for a plan. The creature reached the jammed door, slamming a heavy shoulder against the stuck panel in frustration, and the technician flinched hard enough to fall, scrambling backward against the wall with nowhere left to go. Mia didn't think about the amber warning light, or the readouts Varkash was watching, or the fact that every instinct in her body was screaming that this was the exact moment her mother had once calmly, in the dark, told her never to run toward. She clapped her hands together, once, sharp and loud, and called out, low and firm, the same tone her mother had used that night in the trees. The creature's head snapped toward her instead. For one long, suspended second, nothing in the chamber moved at all. The creature stood between the two of them, the frightened technician frozen against the wall on one side, Mia standing several feet away on the other, hands still raised from the sharp clap that had pulled its attention off its original target. Its chest heaved, sides flaring with each breath, muscles coiled tight beneath dark scales. The warning growl hadn't stopped. If anything, it had deepened, rougher now, edged with something closer to panic than aggression. That's the difference, Mia thought, forcing her breathing to stay slow even as her pulse hammered in her ears. It's not hunting. It's scared. Scared animals were dangerous in a different way than hunting ones. Unpredictable, cornered by sound and confusion rather than driven by purpose. She'd read about this once in one of her father's worn field guides, back when she was young enough to think predator behavior was just an interesting hobby rather than something she'd ever need to use. Mia stepped back toward the primary door. Varkash's voice came again, tighter now, stripped of its earlier clinical detachment. This is no longer within acceptable parameters. If I move, it goes back to her, Mia said, not looking away from the creature, keeping her voice low and even despite everything in her chest screaming otherwise. I need 30 seconds. Just get her out through the gap in the jammed door. That door is not clear. Then clear it. She heard movement above her, urgent voices layered over each other, but she didn't have the attention to spare for any of it. The creature's eyes were locked on her now, wide and dark, the pupils blown open with something that looked less like calculation and more like fear finally catching up to instinct. Mia lowered herself again, slow, deliberate, the same posture she'd used before the alarm had ever sounded. Small, non-threatening, present, but not a challenge. Hey, she said quietly, not to the room, not to Varkash, but to the animal in front of her, the words themselves meaningless to a creature that had no reason to understand human language, but the tone carrying weight all its own. Low, steady, unhurried. I know. That was loud. I know. The creature's growl faltered, just slightly, its head tilting the way it had before the alarm went off, some fragment of the earlier stillness trying to reassert itself over the panic. Behind it, Mia caught motion at the edge of her vision, the technician, guided by a second worker who had finally reached the jam panel, slipping through the widened gap and out of the chamber. A small mechanical groan followed as the door finally released, sliding the rest of the way open before locking safely into its frame. The immediate danger, the panic noise that had set the creature off in the first place, was gone. But the creature didn't calm right away. It stood there, chest still heaving, gaze flicking between Mia and the now empty space where the noise had come from, caught in that lingering, jittery state that came after fear had already done its damage, even once the threat itself had passed. Mia understood that feeling better than almost anything else in her life. She stayed low, stayed still, and let the silence stretch the way her mother had let it stretch in the trees all those years ago, not rushing the moment, not trying to force calm onto something that needed to find its own way back to it. Slowly, the creature's stance eased. Its weight settled back onto all four legs instead of coiled forward. The low growl faded into something quieter, a rough, huffing breath instead of a warning. It took one step back, toward the alcove it had first been resting in, then another, its wariness never fully gone but no longer sharpened into panic. It didn't approach her. It didn't have to. The tension had simply, finally broken on the observation deck. No one spoke for several seconds. Varkash stood with both hands braced against the console, staring down at the chamber, at the girl he had assumed, only 2 days ago, would need saving from a lesson she supposedly hadn't taken seriously enough. "Containment status," he said finally, his voice quieter than Threll had ever heard it. "Stable," the technician reported, still sounding faintly stunned. "Fully stable." Varkash keyed the comm, Cadet Chen. "The primary door is opening. Please exit the chamber." Mia straightened slowly, careful even now not to make any sudden movement, and backed toward the door without turning away from the creature until she was safely through it. The heavy panel ceiling shut behind her with a final, echoing hiss. The moment the door closed, her legs nearly gave out beneath her. All the careful control she'd been holding on to finally allowed to crack. Threll was there before she fully registered moving, one hand gripping her shoulder to steady her, his usual joking tone entirely absent. "You're insane," he said. "You know that, right?" "Completely insane." "Probably," Mia admitted, breathless. Her hands finally started to shake now that there was nothing left requiring them to be steady. Varkash came down from the observation deck a few minutes later, moving slower than usual, the console readout still visible on a small handheld display he carried with him. He stopped in front of Mia, studying her for a long moment before speaking. "You disobeyed a direct instruction," he said. "Yes, sir. You placed yourself in unnecessary danger to protect a technician who was not part of the exercise." "Yes, sir." He was quiet for a moment longer. Then, unexpectedly, something in his rigid posture eased, just slightly, the way the creatures had, once the danger had finally passed. "That," Varkash said, "was not the outcome I was testing for, and it may be the most important thing I have learned all cycle." The Academy's main hall was full that evening. More cadets crowded into a room than Mia had ever seen gathered outside of a mandatory assembly. Word had spread fast, the way it always did, twisted and reshaped with each retelling until half the stories floating around barely resembled what had actually happened. By the time Mia walked in, she'd apparently wrestled the creature barehanded in at least 3 different versions. Varkash stood at the front of the hall, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked almost nervous, shuffling a small stack of notes he didn't actually seem to need. 3 cycles ago," he began, once the room had quieted, "I built a lesson meant to teach cadets the shape of fear. I believed with total confidence that fear was a weakness to be managed, contained, and eventually overcome through exposure and discipline." He glanced toward the back of the room, where Mia stood beside Threll, Asa, and Drafe, all 4 of them trying very hard to look like they weren't the reason everyone kept turning around to stare. "I was wrong," Varkash said simply. "Not about fear itself. Fear is real and fear matters. I was wrong about what it means to face it." He tapped the control, and the same audio file from the very first lesson filled the room again, the low growl that had once sent 40 cadets rigid in their seats. This time, no one flinched. A few even smiled, glancing toward Mia. "This recording," Varkash continued, "belongs to an animal humans call a house cat, a common household companion. And the lesson I failed to teach 3 cycles ago is this. Fear is not something you defeat by refusing to feel it. It is something you survive by understanding it well enough to choose your next move anyway." He looked directly at Mia now. Cadet Chen did not enter that chamber without fear. She told me herself quite plainly that she was afraid. What she did was choose calm over panic, presence over retreat, and the safety of someone else over her own comfort. That is not the absence of fear. That is mastery of it. A murmur moved through the room, quiet at first, then growing into something warmer. Threll elbowed Mia gently in the ribs, grinning despite himself. Asa, standing a little straighter than usual, offered her the smallest of nods. Varkash cleared his throat, and the room settled again. Effective immediately, he said, "This lesson will be restructured for future cycles. An Earth's classification file will be formally amended, pending a proper study this academy should have conducted decades ago." He allowed himself the faintest trace of a smile. "Assuming, of course, we can find a research team brave enough to study a species that keeps predators as pillows." Laughter rolled to the hall, easy and genuine, nothing like the tense, nervous silence from 3 days earlier. Later that evening, after the crowd had thinned and excitement had settled into the comfortable, tired hum that follows a long day, Mia found herself alone in the training wing's observation gallery, looking down at the now-empty chamber below. The creature had been moved to a quieter enclosure for the night, given time to rest after a day that had clearly unsettled it as much as it had unsettled everyone watching. Footsteps approached behind her. She didn't need to turn around and know it was Varkash. "You could have simply obeyed the instruction to retreat," he said, coming to stand beside her at the railing. "The technician would likely have survived regardless. The margins were closer than I would have liked, but they existed." "Probably," Mia agreed. "Then why risk it?" Mia thought about the forest, about her mother's steady voice in the dark, about a lesson she'd learned so early in her life that she'd never really had to think about it since. "Because being calm doesn't mean much if you only use it to protect yourself," she said. "My mom didn't back away from that thing in the trees because she was thinking about her own safety. She was thinking about mine." Varkash was quiet for a long moment, looking out over the dim, empty chamber. "I believe," he said finally, "that Earth's file is going to require a great deal more than one amendment." Mia smiled, small and tired and genuinely happy in a way she hadn't expected to feel after a day like today. "There's a lot more where that came from, sir. Trust me, humans keep some strange things as pets." Varkash let out a short, surprised laugh, the first she'd heard from him all term, and for a moment the two of them simply stood there together, looking down at the quiet chamber, an instructor and a student who had both, in their own way, learned something neither of them had expected to learn that cycle. Somewhere far below, in the enclosure that had held its own small storm of fear and confusion that morning, the creature curled up quietly for night, calm at last, watched over by a species of galaxy it badly, wonderfully underestimated. And somewhere out among the stars, on file cabinets and data drives across 100 academies just like this one, a single line in Earth's threat assessment waited to be rewritten, the first of many corrections still to come.